Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my second episode of making my first comic, which I have titled In Circles Liminal. This episode's topic is pre-writing. Let's get started. So, what exactly is In Circles Liminal? Well, to put it simply, it is the story of two brothers, Ulysses and Harris, who are two bounty hunters working for a powerful corporation who venture into a mysterious, anomalous zone known only as the Circle, which appeared 100 years before the beginning of this story. Before we begin talking about actual pre-writing, I just want to talk about the idea of physically writing, and for that, I recommend getting something like a physical journal. And what having a physical journal allows you to do is to spur on creative motivation. There's something that is completely different when you have a journal in your hand compared to typing away on a computer. I've also got myself a little fountain pen that I use specifically for writing, not for drawing or anything, just because I want the writing experience to be as comfortable as possible. So, with your physical journal in hand, you should also just find a comfortable place to write in, whether that is your bedroom, a study, or even your living room. Whatever is most comfortable to you should be the place that you write in. And before you start writing, just sit down, relax, and get in that creative mindset. All right, with all of that out of the way, let's get into our main topic of pre-writing. So, what exactly is pre-writing? Well, pre-writing is the initial stage of writing where you generate and organize ideas before you begin your actual writing. But why is pre-writing important? It's a low-risk method for getting ideas down on the paper without having to commit to any one specific idea. It's what's sometimes referred to as the blue sky phase. This is a phase in your writing process where essentially anything goes. And once you get deep into your pre-writing phase, you can then edit down your ideas to see what works and what doesn't work. All that matters is you get everything that you can down on that page. So how exactly am I using pre-writing for In Circles Liminal? Because the core of this story is the relationship between the two brothers, Ulysses and Harris, I spent a lot of time working on the characterization of these two characters. Some time was also spent working on world building. Establishing rules for the Circle was at the forefront of my mind. There is a lot of world building that will not necessarily explicitly make it into the comic, but the backstory for the world I created should help to make the world more believable and help inform future decisions. And probably the least amount of time has been spent on the plot itself. I'm still not 100% finished with the plot because I don't want to vomit out some terribly contrived story. Sure, there are beats I want to hit, but in the end, I want the narrative to be fueled by my characters' choices, so I find it most necessary to get to know them first as characters, which is the purpose of this pre-writing phase. So what are some popular pre-writing strategies that I used for writing In Circles Liminal? First we have free writing. This is related to the blue sky phase terminology that we were talking about earlier. It's essentially when you write down anything and everything that comes to mind in a stream of consciousness form. Any thought that you have, whether you deem it to be stupid or genius, should go down on that page. There's no discretion here. This free writing technique allows you to articulate your ideas and bring them into reality without one bias, one way or another, because you never know if one idea will be useful in the future, so you might as well get it down now. Another technique we have is clustering. This is the process of writing down a topic or an idea at the center of your page and then circling it. You then branch off other smaller bubbles from this main topic, and you can do this as densely as you want on the page. Once you have these clusters of ideas, you can then begin to link them together by either grouping them together in larger bubbles or by connecting them with lines. This technique is useful for world building, I find, and very useful for creating interwoven themes throughout your story. By establishing a hierarchy of thought and by grouping together your ideas, you can start to make connections that you would not have otherwise have made. And finally, we have the general broader technique of lists. Now, this can take many different forms, and it is very closely related to your free writing stage, but except this, of course, is in a list form instead of stream of consciousness. Some of the lists that I did were inspirations. I simply just made an entire list of the pieces of media I am inspired by. And this can be anything from music to books to movies to paintings. It's good to have those things written down because you might want to come back to those pieces of media later to gain more inspiration. Another set of lists that I generated were for character profiles. A list that I made for my character profiles was a wants versus needs list. This is very important to what a character is at their center, because what a character wants and what they need are more than not likely going to be the same thing. And by having this conflict of wants versus needs, you can create a well-rounded character. For example, I heard this on the Comic Labs podcast. Michael Scott from The Office is a man who desperately wants a family, but what he really needs is people skills. By having this tension of wants versus needs, you can start to create characters that are more believable. Another list that I created for character profiles is a list of likes and dislikes. By creating a list of likes and dislikes, you can start to build your character out more on a more general level. This can range from anything from liking the weather to disliking the way that people smell, I guess. Whatever it is that your characters like and dislike, it's very good to get it down in a list format because this is something that you could come back to again and again as you are writing in the future. Another useful list that you can create for your characters is a list of fears. This goes simply beyond the list of likes and dislikes. For obvious reasons, it is important that you get something like this down, depending on your story. And I just want to add in at the end here, this sort of fits into the character profile section, but I found it very useful to create backstories for each of my characters. While you won't be telling your readers the backstories of each and every character, it's very useful for you as the author to be able to know these characters on that deeper level. And backstories are very important. They help you decide how characters are going to react to different situations. For example, in my comic, Harris, Ulysses' brother, was once a white-collar corporate employee for the company Tangent that commodifies the circle. Now, this creates an interesting dichotomy between the brothers because Ulysses is not a former white-collar worker. He has been essentially born and bred with the rules of the circle, while Harris has existed outside of this space for a while, so obviously he's going to have different worldviews from Ulysses. And while I won't explicitly state this backstory in the story, we can imply a lot through the ways that characters interact with each other and how they see their world. What did I learn from this pre-writing phase? One important thing that I learned from pre-writing in my journal for this comic was that making characters can be incredibly involved if you want it to be. You can breathe so much life into your characters if you just take the time to sit down and write down things like backstories, wants versus needs, or fears. By treating characters like they are real people, this allows for dynamics to flourish on the page. I also learned quite a bit about world building. Making a world isn't as simple as just saying, in my case, oh, my story just takes place in a post-apocalyptic America. While it is that on a surface level, it goes so incredibly deep, and it has a lot of nuances that I would not have figured out had it not been for this pre-writing section. That's because in order to have a believable world, you need to lay down strict foundational rules. Just for a little bit of flavor, for an example, in my story, the circle is only taking up part of America. It's only a circle in about the southeast portion of America. So that means that there's an entire world outside of the circle, and it is completely different than the world inside the circle. And by having this dynamic established in the background of my mind when I'm writing, I am going to be able to come up with a ton of interesting ideas, stories, characters, etc. Another thing that I learned how to do, and this is thanks to a combination of everything, is I learned how to interweave things that are a bit more abstract, like themes, character dynamics, the world, and just the plot as a whole. Because I took the time in this pre-writing section, that means in the future when I'm writing, it's going to be easier to give these connections more weight. Now, there are a lot of challenges and pitfalls when it comes to starting a larger project such as this, and I am completely aware of this. For this, I'm going to be using a tightrope walker analogy. Say you have a tightrope walker that is walking a line from points A to B. A represents the beginning, B represents the end. We're going to imagine myself here at the beginning of my creative project as being at point A. From the tightrope walker's perspective, the line looks straight. You can see the end very clearly. It's very easy at this point to imagine how you will finish, and it doesn't really look that difficult. Once you start to walk further and further along the line, once you get deeper into your project, the more the line begins to sag, and the closer you get to the ground. From this perspective, that end that was so clearly in sight at the beginning starts to become a little obscured just because of how far you are at the bottom. This is when you're doing the most amount of work in your creative project, and at this point, it is incredibly tempting to jump off to the safety of the ground, but you have to envision the end of that project in your mind. Because even if the destination is not in sight, you have to know that that line, which follows that linear trajectory, is going to end up at your point B, or the end of that project. And this is something that I am wanting to keep in mind the more and more I work on in Circles Liminal. We have now reached the end of the video, and the overarching question is, why does pre-writing matter? Personally, I find pre-writing to be a tool that takes that monumental task of undertaking a very large project, and it breaks it up into smaller parts that are more manageable. And the more manageable we can make a larger project, such as a 30 to 40 page comic, the better it is going to be to stay on track. Pre-writing also allows for writers to get their ideas on the page for further refinement. Remember, you don't have to have amazing, polished ideas at this stage, but you can make them more polished through future work. What's important now is that you just have it written down. And how specifically did pre-writing help in Circles Liminal? For me, pre-writing helped me to organize my thoughts and ideas on the page. It also helped me to understand my characters and my world so much better. You have to get acquainted with your characters and your world in order to make interesting stories surrounding them and within them. And finally, I find this to be the most important. Pre-writing helped me come up with ideas that I probably would not have had I just kept everything in my head. By having those words physically down on the page, it ends up spurring on new ideas, new connections. If you just keep everything in your brain, you're not really fully engaging with it. Think of the pre-writing process as the working out part of writing whatever it is that you're writing. You're working through all the difficult bits now so that later, whenever you're shooting for that PR, it's just a little bit easier. So, thank you for watching this video. In the next video in this comic making series, we are going to be tackling character design. So, if you're interested in that, I hope to see you there.